My dad secretly paid for my cousin's dream home while telling me there was no money for my education, and I finally learned why I was never his priority. And in that moment, as I stood in the dim glow of my laptop screen in our cluttered suburban living room, the rain pattering against the bay window like 1,000 tiny accusations, the world tilted on its axis, pulling the rug out from under the fragile structure of my life that I'd built on half-truths and unspoken resentments. It was a Tuesday evening in early fall, the kind where the air smells like wet leaves and impending regret, and I'd just gotten home from my shift at the coffee shop downtown, where I sling lattes to college kids who remind me every day of what I never got to be, my apron still smelling faintly of espresso grounds and spilled milk as I kicked off my sneakers by the door, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the distant murmur of Mom's true crime podcast drifting from the kitchen, where she was probably chopping vegetables for another casserole dinner, the kind we eat because it's cheap and filling, not because anyone particularly loves it. I'd plop down on the sagging couch, the one with the throw pillows embroidered with optimistic sayings like "family is everything," that now felt like cruel irony, intending to scroll through job listings on my phone, anything to escape the dead-end loop of minimum wage and mounting student loans from the community college classes I'd scraped together on my own. But instead, I found myself idly checking the family email account, the one we all share for bills and school notices, though Dad insists on managing it because he's the one who pays for everything, a phrase he's thrown at me more times than I can count whenever I've dared to ask for help. There it was, buried in the spam folder like some guilty secret the algorithm had tried to hide, an email confirmation from a real estate wire transfer service, the subject line blandly reading, "Transaction complete. $350,000 to Alexander Reed." And my cousin Alex's name jumped out at me like a slap, because why on earth would Dad be sending that kind of money to him, the golden boy who grew up in the next town over, the one who always got the new bikes and the summer camps, while I made do with hand-me-downs and library books? My heart started pounding, a sickening thud that echoed in my ears as I clicked open the attachment, a scanned copy of a deed for a charming craftsman-style house in Portland, complete with photos of gleaming hardwood floors and a backyard big enough for barbecues, the kind of dream home Alex had been posting about on social media for months, bragging about how he'd manifested it through hard work and smart investments. But here was the proof. Dad's signature scrawled at the bottom of the loan cosigner form, the funds drawn from a home equity line I'd never even known existed on our modest 3-bedroom rancher, the one where the roof leaks during heavy storms, and the carpet in my room is threadbare from years of pacing during sleepless nights, worrying about tuition. I felt a wave of nausea rise, hot and bitter, as fragments of conversations replayed in my mind. Dad's stern face 2 years ago when I'd begged for help with my college applications, his voice flat as he said, "There's no money for that, Emily. You need to figure it out on your own. Life's not a handout." While I cried in my room afterwards, staring at the rejection letters from universities I couldn't afford without scholarships I didn't get because my high school transcript was marred by the part-time jobs I'd taken to help with groceries after Mom's layoff. And now this betrayal sliced open old wounds I'd bandaged with excuses like, "He's just old school. Tough love builds character." But seeing the numbers, the zeros that could have changed everything for me, turned those excuses to ash in my mouth. I didn't even hear Dad's car pull into the driveway, the gravel crunching under tires as he came home from his accounting job, the one he complains about endlessly over dinner, how the clients are demanding and the hours are long, but apparently not so long that he couldn't orchestrate the secret generosity for Alex, whose parents, Dad's sister and her husband, had always been the successful ones in the family, the ones with the lake house vacations we were never invited to. The front door creaked open, and there he was, loosening his tie, his face lined with the fatigue of a man in his late 50s who's carried the weight of unspoken burdens, or so I'd always thought, but now I wondered if those lines were from guilt, from the lies he'd woven into our family fabric. "Hey, kiddo," he said casually, hanging up his coat, but I couldn't respond, my throat tight as I thrust the laptop toward him, the screen illuminating his features in a harsh blue light that made him look ghostly. "What is this?" I managed, my voice breaking on the words, and he froze, his eyes widening in that split second of recognition, the color draining from his cheeks as he stammered, "Emily, I can explain." But the words hung there, inadequate and insulting, because what explanation could justify robbing me of my future to gift-wrap someone else's? The room spun, and I felt tears stinging, hot trails down my face as anger surged, a tidal wave crashing over the dam of respect I'd always maintained, even when he missed my school plays or forgot my birthdays because work was busy. Mom emerged from the kitchen then, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her brow furrowing at the tension crackling in the air like static before a storm. "What's going on?" she asked softly, but I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see if she knew, if she'd been complicit in this favoritism that suddenly explained so much, the way Dad lit up at Alex's achievements, the football scholarships and the business degree, while my own straight A's and art awards were met with perfunctory nods. I spat, He gave Alex a house, hundreds of thousands, while telling me there was nothing for college, nothing for me. Dad sank into the armchair, his hands trembling as he rubbed his temples, muttering, "It wasn't like that, Em. There were reasons." But I didn't want reasons then. I wanted the pain to stop, the betrayal to unwind like a bad dream. But it was real, as real as the coffee mug cooling on the side table, the one with the chip from when I dropped it during one of our rare arguments. The fallout was immediate, a chasm opening between us in that living room, where family photos on the mantel mocked us with frozen smiles from happier times, beach trips when I was little, before money tightened and priorities shifted, or so I believed. I stormed upstairs, slamming my bedroom door, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot, collapsing on my bed with sobs racking my body, the pillow muffling the raw agony of feeling like an afterthought in my own family. Downstairs, I could hear muffled voices, Mom's soothing tone clashing with Dad's defensive murmurs, but I tuned them out, curling into myself as the rain intensified, drumming on the roof like judgment. How had I missed the signs? The extra phone calls to Aunt Linda, the vague mentions of helping family, the way Dad's eyes avoided mine when I'd talk about my dreams of studying graphic design, of escaping this town with its strip malls and predictable routines. That night, sleep evaded me, my mind racing through memories tainted now by this revelation. The Christmases where Alex got lavish gifts and I got practical ones. The family reunions where Dad beamed at him like a second son, while I faded into the background. Guilt gnawed at me, too, for resenting Alex, who probably didn't even know the full story, posting his housewarming photos on Instagram with captions about gratitude and hard work. But here was the proof. Dad's signature scrawled at the bottom of the loan cosigner form, the funds drawn from a home equity line I'd never even known existed on our modest 3-bedroom rancher, the one where the roof leaks during heavy storms and the carpet in my room is threadbare from years of pacing during sleepless nights, worrying about tuition. I felt a wave of nausea rise, hot and bitter, as fragments of conversations replayed in my mind. Dad's stern face 2 years ago when I'd begged for help with my college applications, his voice flat as he said, "There's no money for that, Emily. You need to figure it out on your own. Life's not a handout." While I cried in my room afterwards, staring at the rejection letters from universities I couldn't afford without scholarships I didn't get because my high school transcript was marred by the part-time jobs I'd taken to help with groceries after Mom's layoff. And now this betrayal sliced open old wounds I'd bandaged with excuses like, "He's just old school. Tough love builds character." But seeing the numbers, the zeros that could have changed everything for me, turned those excuses to ash in my mouth. I didn't even hear Dad's car pull into the driveway, the gravel crunching under tires as he came home from his accounting job, the one he complains about endlessly over dinner, how the clients are demanding and the hours are long, but apparently not so long that he couldn't orchestrate the secret generosity for Alex, whose parents, Dad's sister and her husband, had always been the successful ones in the family, the ones with the lake house vacations we were never invited to. The front door creaked open, and there he was, loosening his tie, his face lined with the fatigue of a man in his late 50s who's carried the weight of unspoken burdens, or so I'd always thought, but now I wondered if those lines were from guilt, from the lies he'd woven into our family fabric. "Hey, kiddo," he said casually, hanging up his coat, but I couldn't respond, my throat tight as I thrust the laptop toward him, the screen illuminating his features in a harsh blue light that made him look ghostly. "What is this?" I managed, my voice breaking on the words, and he froze, his eyes widening in that split second of recognition, the color draining from his cheeks as he stammered, "Emily." That first full night after the discovery stretched into something endless and suffocating, the kind of darkness that presses against your skin like wet wool, every hour marked not by clocks, but by the slow drip of my own tears, soaking into the pillowcase I'd clutched since childhood, the one with faded purple stars Mom had bought me at a flea market when I was 8 and still believed fathers were invincible. Downstairs, the house settled into an unnatural quiet after the initial explosion. Mom had tried to coax me out of my room with a cup of chamomile tea left outside my door, the steam curling up under the crack like a whispered apology, but I couldn't face her yet. Couldn't bear to see whether her eyes held complicity or the same stunned hurt I felt. So I stayed curled on my side, knees drawn up, smartphone screen dimmed to its lowest setting as I reread the email chain I'd forwarded to myself before Dad could delete anything, each line searing deeper. The polite realtor thank yous, Alex's casual text to Dad embedded in one reply, "Uncle Mike, you're a legend, seriously can't thank you enough, closing next week." And Dad's response, clipped but warm, "Anything for family, kid, just keep it between us for now." Anything for family. The phrase looped in my head like a taunt, because apparently that family didn't include me, not in the ways that mattered, not when it came to the kind of help that could have lifted me out of this suffocating suburb, where every strip mall and soccer field reminded me I was stuck. Around midnight, I heard Dad's heavy footsteps on the stairs again, pausing longer this time outside my door, his breathing audible through the wood, uneven and ragged as though he'd been crying too, or maybe just rehearsing explanations that refused to form into anything defensible. He didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood there for what felt like minutes before retreating back down, the creak of each step a small surrender. I waited until the house went completely still, then slipped downstairs in socks, avoiding the squeaky third tread, drawn by a sudden, desperate need to see the physical proof again, as though touching the printed deed I'd found tucked in the top drawer of his desk might make it less real or more so. The kitchen light was off, but the under-cabinet LEDs glowed faintly, casting long shadows across the granite countertop still dusted with flour from whatever Mom had been stress baking earlier. Cinnamon rolls, probably, the one she makes when words fail her. And there, beside the fruit bowl, sat Dad's laptop, lid half closed like he'd left it in haste. I opened it, the screen waking to his email inbox, no password because he'd never imagined I'd look, and the thread was still there, undeleted, along with bank statements I scrolled through with shaking fingers, monthly transfers to Aunt Linda's account labeled vaguely family support, totaling far more than the house down payment, stretching back years, birthday checks I never received, summer camp fees for Alex while I babysat neighborhood kids to afford new sketchbooks. Each line item felt like another layer peeled from the father I thought I knew, revealing someone who'd rationed affection the way he rationed money, doling it out to the child who reflected his own ambitions back at him, the athletic, outgoing nephew who played varsity and joined the right fraternities, while I, quiet and artistic and stubbornly female in a family that prized stoic masculinity, even in its women, was left to scrape by on grit and loans in late-night shifts. Tears blurred the numbers. I wiped them away angrily, not wanting to give him even the satisfaction of salt stains on his keyboard. When I finally looked up, Mom was standing in the doorway in her old terry cloth robe, hair mussed from restless turning, eyes red-rimmed but steady. She didn't ask why I was snooping. She just crossed the room, pulled out the chair beside me, and sat, close enough that our shoulders brushed, a small anchor in the spinning room. "I didn't know about the house," she said quietly, voice hoarse from earlier crying or shouting or both. "The extra money to Linda, yes, bits and pieces over the years. He said it was loans, that she'd pay it back, but not this much, not like this." Her hand hovered over mine, then settled there, cool and trembling. "He told me the equity line was for emergencies. I believed him because I wanted to." The admission hung between us, raw and unadorned, and for the first time I saw the guilt she carried too, the wife who'd deferred to his financial decisions for 30 years, who'd clipped coupons and skipped hair appointments so we could have Christmas presents, never questioning where the discretionary dollars went, because questioning meant admitting the marriage rested on a foundation of selective silences. We sat like that for a long time, the kitchen clock ticking toward 2 a.m., rain still tapping the windows in irregular bursts, until she finally whispered, "He's sleeping on the couch tonight, said he couldn't face our bud." I nodded, throat too tight for words, and when she stood to make us both a decaf, because neither of us would sleep anyway, I let her, watching the familiar motions of measuring grounds, pouring water, the small domestic rituals that had always felt safe until tonight. She set my mug in front of me, steam rising in fragile spirals, and said, "We'll talk tomorrow, all three of us. No more secrets." But her voice cracked on the last word, betraying how fragile that promise felt. Upstairs again, I left my door cracked a tiny concession to the possibility that someone might need me, or that I might need them, though right then the thought of seeing Dad's face made my stomach lurch. I lay on top of the covers, fully clothed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling since middle school, their faint luminescence mocking the darkness inside me. Memories flickered unbidden, Dad teaching Alex to throw a spiral at family picnics while I sat sketching under a tree, unnoticed, the way he'd brag about Alex's SAT scores at holiday dinners, but change the subject when mine came up. The Christmas 2 years ago when Alex opened an envelope with plane tickets to Europe, a graduation gift from Uncle Mike, and my gift was a sensible winter coat I needed but hadn't asked for. Each recollection sharpened the ache, turning grief into something jagged and precise. Around 4, I heard soft footsteps again, Dad probably, checking if I was asleep, and I held my breath until he moved on, the hallway floorboards sighing under his weight. The confession I'd half expected never came. No late-night monologue through the door, no handwritten notes slipped underneath. Just silence, thick with everything unsaid. By dawn, the rain had stopped, leaving the world outside my window glistening and indifferent, streetlights reflected in shallow puddles like scattered coins no one would claim. I hadn't slept, hadn't even closed my eyes for more than a few minutes, but the exhaustion was bone deep now, a heavy blanket that smothered rage into something duller, more manageable. Grief, maybe, or the first faint recognition that this wound had been festering for years beneath polite surface smiles and yes-dad obedience. Mom knocked gently around 7, bringing toast I couldn't eat, her face pale but resolute. "He's in the garage," she said, "working on that old bike he never finishes. I think he's waiting for you to come down when you're ready." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and she left the plate on my dresser, retreating without pressing. Alone again, I stared at the ceiling stars fading into daylight, wondering how we'd fill the hours ahead, how we'd sit across from each other at the breakfast table and pretend normalcy when everything had cracked open. The night had stripped us raw, left us exposed to truths too heavy for easy morning light, yet here we are, still under the same roof, breathing the same air, tethered by history and hurt and the stubborn, inconvenient fact that we were still family, even if that word now felt like a question instead of an answer. The morning after that sleepless night arrived brittle and gray, the kind of late fall light that filters through half-drawn blinds and makes every surface look slightly dusty, slightly neglected, as though the house itself had aged overnight from the weight of what we now knew. I stayed in my room longer than necessary, listening to the familiar household sounds shift into something strained. The coffee maker gurgling downstairs like it was trying too hard to sound normal. Mom's slippers shuffling across the kitchen tiles. The clink of a spoon against ceramic. Dad's low cough when he thought no one was listening. Eventually, hunger and the need to pee forced me out, and I patted down in yesterday's clothes, hair tangled, eyes puffy from crying, determined not to let them see how thoroughly the discovery had hollowed me out. They were both at the table when I entered, Mom at her usual spot by the window, nursing a mug that had gone cold, Dad across from her with his back to me, shoulders hunched inside the same flannel shirt he'd worn for 3 days straight now, the one I used to tease him about because it smelled like sawdust and Old Spice. No one spoke at first. The silence was so thick I could hear the refrigerator compressor kick on, a mechanical heartbeat underscoring the awkwardness. I poured myself coffee, black, the way I'd started drinking it when money got tight and creamer felt like a luxury, and sat at the head of the table, equidistant from both of them, claiming neutral ground. Dad turned slowly, his face grayish under the stubble, eyes bloodshot but steady, and the first thing he said was, "I'm sorry, Emily." The words landing soft and inadequate, like dropping a pebble into a canyon and waiting for the echo that never quite comes. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I stared into my mug, watching the surface tremble with each shaky breath I took. Mom reached across and covered my free hand with hers, a small, warm pressure that anchored me enough to finally look up. "We need to talk about how to handle this with the rest of the family," she said quietly, "before anyone else finds out the way you did." The rest of the family. The phrase stung because it included Aunt Linda and Alex, the very people who'd benefited from the secret, and suddenly the anger flared again, sharper now in daylight. "You mean before Alex posts another picture of his new kitchen island and tags you in it?" I asked, voice low but cutting. Dad winced, visibly, like I'd struck him. "He doesn't know the full story," he said. "Aunt Linda asked for help with the down payment years ago when Alex was starting his business, said it was temporary, that they'd refinance later. It snowballed. I never meant—" He stopped, swallowing hard. "I never meant for you to feel like you came second." But I did, I thought, and the truth of it sat between us like a third person at the table. We spent the next hour circling the same painful ground. Why he said no to my tuition when the equity line existed, why he co-signed for Alex's mortgage instead of offering me even a fraction for community college, beyond what federal loans covered, why the pattern of favoritism had felt so invisible until the numbers made it undeniable. His explanations were halting, layered with defensiveness that kept crumbling into shame. He talked about how Alex reminded him of the chances he never got, how Linda had struggled after her divorce and he felt responsible as the older brother, how he'd convinced himself that tough love would make me stronger, while helping Alex would keep the family name respected in the wider circle. Each reason sounded reasonable in isolation, but stacked together they formed a wall of rationalization that had kept me on the outside looking in for years. Mom listened mostly in silence, occasionally interjecting with gentle corrections. "You told me the money was for Linda's medical bills, Mike, not a house." And I watched her face cycle through hurt, anger, resignation, the same emotions I felt, but tempered by decades of choosing peace over confrontation. By the time the coffee pot clicked empty, we'd reached the only practical decision we could manage. Boundaries. No more shared family email logins, no more vague family support transfers without full disclosure to Mom and me, and, most importantly, no contact with Aunt Linda or Alex until we'd figured out what came next. "I'll call Linda today," Dad said rough. "Tell her we need space, that the money stops until we sort this out." I nodded, though the thought of him dialing her number made my stomach twist. Part of me wanted to hear the conversation, to witness the reckoning, but another part recoiled at the idea of more drama spilling over phone lines. Mom suggested therapy, not couples, not yet, but individual for each of us, so we can say what we need to say without it turning into a fight every time. I agreed immediately. I'd been thinking about it for months anyway. The free sessions through the employee assistance program at the coffee shop that I'd never used because admitting I needed help felt like another failure. Dad hesitated, then nodded too. The concession, small but seismic. After that, the morning unraveled into ordinary tasks that felt surreal in their normalcy. Mom loading the dishwasher, humming tunelessly, Dad retreating to the garage to tinker with the motorcycle he never rides, me clearing my dishes and heading upstairs to change for my afternoon shift. But before I left, I paused in the hallway outside the garage door, hearing the clank of tools and the occasional muttered curse, and something in me softened just enough to push the door open a crack. He looked up, startled, grease on his knuckles, eyes wary. "I'm going to work. I don't hate you, I just don't understand you right now." He set the wrench down carefully, wiped his hands on a rag. "I don't understand me either, sometimes," he admitted, so quietly I almost missed it. "But I'm going to try to fix what I can." It wasn't absolution, wasn't even close, but it was honesty, and in that moment, it was enough to keep me from slamming the door again. I drove to work with the windows cracked, cold air rushing in to clear my head, NPR droning about interest rates and housing markets, ironic background noise that made me laugh once, a short, bitter sound. At the shop, the routine swallowed me. Steaming milk, calling orders, wiping counters, the small repetitive motions a temporary shield against the churning inside. My coworker Jenna noticed the redness around my eyes and asked if I was okay. I gave her the shorthand version. Family stuff. And she squeezed my shoulder. No questions, just quiet solidarity that reminded me the world outside our house still turned. When I got home that evening, the house smelled of spaghetti sauce simmering, Mom's peace offering meal, and Dad had set the table with actual cloth napkins instead of paper towels, a small gesture that felt both clumsy and earnest. We ate mostly in silence, forks scraping plates, the television murmuring low in the background, some cooking show no one was really watching. Halfway through, Mom said, "I made appointments, individual sessions starting next week, separate therapists." Dad nodded, I nodded, no one argued. After dinner, I cleared the table while they loaded the dishwasher together, their movements practiced and careful, like people learning to walk again after an accident. Later, in my room, I texted my best friend Mara a long voice note, the words tumbling out in a rush, everything, the house, the money, the favoritism, then deleted it before sending, not ready to let the story exist outside these walls yet. Instead, I opened my sketchbook, the one I hadn't touched in weeks, and drew. Jagged lines, a house with too many windows and no door, a figure standing outside, looking in. The pencil felt heavy, but the act of making marks on paper grounded me, reminded me I still had something that was mine alone. Down the hall, I heard Dad's voice on the phone, low, strained, talking to Aunt Linda, I assumed. The words indistinct, but the tone unmistakable, regret laced with resolve. Mom knocked softly, sat on the edge of my bed, and we talked in fragments about how she felt betrayed too, about how she'd spent years smoothing over his decisions without questioning them, about how sorry she was for not seeing it sooner. We didn't hug. We weren't there yet, but she stayed until I yawned and then kissed my forehead like I was 10 again, whispering, "We're going to get through this, Em. Not perfect, but through." When she left, I lay in the dark listening to the house breathe, the furnace clicking on, the wind rattling the gutters, Dad's footsteps pacing the living room before finally settling on the couch again. Protecting the others meant protecting myself first, I realized, meant drawing lines so the hurt didn't spread further, didn't poison every future interaction with suspicion. It was exhausting, this new vigilance, but beneath it flickered something almost like relief. The secret was out, the pretending over. Tomorrow would bring more hard conversations, more boundaries to set, but tonight, for the first time in days, I fell asleep without crying. The ache still there, but no longer screaming, just a steady, honest pulse reminding me that healing, if it came at all, would be slow and deliberate, built one guarded truth at a time. By the following weekend, the house felt like it was holding its breath. Every creak of the floorboards and click of the thermostat amplified in the careful quiet we'd all adopted, as though normal volume might shatter what little composure remained. Friday night, after my shift, I came home to find Mom packing a small duffel on the kitchen table. Jeans, sweaters, the soft gray scarf I'd given her 2 Christmases ago, while Dad hovered in the doorway like a man waiting for permission to exist in his own home. "I'm going to stay with Aunt Karen for a couple nights," Mom announced when she saw me, voice steady but eyes betraying the tremor underneath. "Not because I'm leaving anyone, just because I need air that doesn't taste like all this." She gestured vaguely at the walls, at us, at the invisible weight pressing down since Tuesday. I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to. The thought of sleeping under the same roof as Dad another night made my skin crawl too, even though he'd taken to sleeping in the guest room now, door firmly closed, no more couch for show. "I'll be back Sunday afternoon," she added, zipping the bag. "We can talk then, or not talk, whatever feels right." Dad opened his mouth, closed it, then simply carried her bag to the car while I stood frozen, watching the ordinary ritual of departure turn extraordinary. When the taillights disappeared down the street, the house seemed to exhale, suddenly too big and too empty. Dad lingered in the foyer afterward, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I'm not going anywhere," he said quietly, as though I might think he would. "But if you want the place to yourself, I can—" "No," I cut in, surprising myself. "Stay. Just stay out of my way for a bit." He nodded, relief flickering across his face before he turned toward the living room, flicking on the television to some sports recap nobody was watching, the low drone of commentators filling the silence like white noise. I retreated upstairs, locked my door, not out of fear, but out of the need for a boundary I could control, and opened my laptop to the one person I finally felt ready to tell, Mara. This time I didn't delete the voice note. I sent it, all 12 minutes of halting, tear-choked explanation, then waited, heart hammering, while 3 little dots danced, disappeared, danced again. Her reply came as a call instead of text. "I'm coming over," she said before I could even say hello. "Right now. Don't argue." Half an hour later, she arrived with takeout bags, pad thai and spring rolls from the place on Maple we used to walk to after school, and a bottle of cheap red wine she'd swiped from her mom's pantry. We sat cross-legged on my bed, balanced containers on our knees, passing the bottle back and forth while I recounted everything again, slower this time, the details no longer rushing out but settling like sediment. Mara listened without interrupting, only reaching over once to squeeze my ankle when my voice cracked on the part about the equity line. When I finished, she set her fork down, wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and said, "Okay, first rule, no more secrets from me. Second rule, we make our own rules for how you handle this, because your dad doesn't get to dictate the pace anymore." We spent the next hours hashing out what transparency could look like, practical things, grounded in the everyday mess of our lives. I would have full access to any family financial accounts that affected me. She suggested I start by asking Mom for the login to the joint checking when she got back. Dad would need to show receipts or statements for any family support going forward, no exceptions. If he wanted to help Alex or Aunt Linda again, he'd discuss it openly first, with both of us, me and Mom, present, and accept whatever veto came. No more vague promises of someday there'll be money for that. If there wasn't money now, he'd say so plainly, and we'd figure out alternatives together. Scholarship lists, side gigs, community college extensions I could actually afford. Mara typed it all into a shared note on her phone titled Emily's Non-Negotiables, then emailed it to me with the subject line, Your New House Rules, the good kind. Downstairs, Dad had retreated to the garage again. I could hear the occasional metallic clank, the whir of the sander, sounds that used to annoy me but now felt like proof he was still here, still trying in his limited, clumsy way. Around midnight, Mara left, hugging me so tight my ribs ached, whispering, You're not alone in this, okay? Text me anytime, even 3 a.m. I watched her drive away, then went downstairs to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of decaf, steam curling up in the dim light. He didn't look up right away, just pushed 1 mug toward the empty chair. I sat. We sipped in silence for a minute, the coffee bitter but warm. I called a therapist today. First appointment's Wednesday. Individual, like we talked about. I nodded, surprised he'd followed through so quickly. Good. Another pause, longer. I also transferred $5,000 to your account this afternoon. Not a fix, not even close. Just something to start with. For classes, supplies, whatever you need. No strings. My throat tightened. I stared into my mug, watching the surface ripple with my unsteady breath. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was the first concrete action that felt directed at me, not away from me. Thank you, I managed. The word's small but genuine. But it's not just about money anymore. I know, he said softly. I know. We didn't hug, didn't cry, didn't suddenly understand each other perfectly. We just sat there, 2 people who'd spent years orbiting the same house without really seeing each other, now trying to learn the language of honesty 1 awkward sentence at a time. Saturday passed in a strange, suspended rhythm. I worked a double shift, came home to find the Ridge restocked with groceries I hadn't asked for, yogurt, fresh berries, the almond milk I liked, small offerings left without fanfare. Dad mowed the lawn even though it didn't need it, the roar of the engine drowning out whatever thoughts circled his head. I sketched in my room, page after page of fractured houses and open doors, the pencil strokes less angry now, more searching. Sunday morning, Mom returned, looking rested but still guarded, her duffel lighter somehow, as though she'd left some of the heaviness behind. We gathered in the living room, not the kitchen this time, not the table where so many silent meals had been eaten, sat on the couch with mugs of fresh coffee, and I read her the note Mara and I made. She listened, nodded, added a few items of her own. Joint therapy down the line, maybe, once individual sessions had laid some groundwork. No more unilateral decisions about money, ever. Weekly check-ins, even if they were short. Dad agreed to everything, voice low, eyes on his hands folded in his lap. When we finished, Mom reached over and touched my knee lightly. You set the pace, Em. We follow. The words landed soft but solid, a promise I could almost believe. That afternoon, I took the car keys, Dad's old sedan he rarely drove anymore, and drove out to the state park 20 minutes away, the one with the gravel trails and the small lake where people rented kayaks in summer. I walked alone for hours, phone on silent, letting the cold air scour my lungs, watching leaves skitter across the path like scattered thoughts. No grand epiphanies arrived, no sudden forgiveness, but a quiet clarity settled in. I could take space without leaving, could demand accountability without cutting ties completely. When I got home, the porch light was on, dinner warming in the oven, Mom's lasagna, the kind with extra cheese because she knew I loved it, and Dad was in the garage again, but this time the door was open, inviting, rather than closed off. I didn't go in, not yet, but I left my jacket on the hook beside his, a small gesture of coexistence. The weekend had given me distance enough to breathe, rules enough to feel safe, and the faint, fragile sense that rebuilding might be possible. Not easy, not quick, but possible, if we all kept showing up, even when it hurt. As I climbed the stairs to my room that night, the house felt less like a cage and more like a place where 3 bruised people were learning, slowly, how to occupy the same space without breaking each other further. The first individual therapy appointment arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in late November, the sky the color of old pewter, and the air sharp enough to make my cheeks sting as I walked the 3 blocks from the bus stop to the low brick building tucked behind a strip of medical offices, the kind of place that advertised mental health services in discreet sans serif lettering so passersby wouldn't feel judged for needing help. I'd taken the afternoon off work, telling my manager it was a family thing, and she'd nodded without prying, handing me a to-go cup of peppermint tea for the nerves that I clutched the whole ride over like a talisman. The waiting room smelled faintly of lavender diffusers and printer ink. I filled out the intake forms on a tablet, checkboxes for anxiety, depression, family conflict, financial stress, each tap feeling like admitting defeat and defiance at the same time. When the therapist, Dr. Nguyen, called my name, she was shorter than I'd pictured. Mid-40s, maybe, dark hair pulled into a loose knot, wearing soft gray slacks and a cardigan that looked like it had been chosen for comfort rather than style. Her office was small but warm. A low couch, 2 armchairs, a box of tissues within easy reach, a single potted snake plant on the windowsill catching the weak daylight. She didn't start with, "So tell me why you're here," like I'd feared. Instead, she asked how the drive was, if the traffic had been bad. Small talk that somehow eased me into the chair without feeling like an interrogation. I talked for 45 minutes straight once I started. About the email, the house, the years of being told there was no money while watching it flow elsewhere, the way Dad's face had crumpled when I confronted him, but how the apology still felt like it landed on the wrong side of the chasm. I cried, more than I expected. Ugly crying, the kind that leaves your nose running and your voice hoarse. And Dr. Nguyen just passed tissues and nodded, never once looking away or checking her watch. Toward the end, she asked a quiet question that lodged in my chest. What would it look like if you felt like a priority to him, even now? I didn't have an answer, not really, just a vague image of him asking about my day without the conversation veering to Alex's latest promotion, of him remembering my upcoming community college registration deadline without me having to remind him 3 times. She didn't push for more. She simply said, "We'll keep coming back to that question. You don't have to solve it today." When the session ended, I felt wrung out, but strangely lighter, like I'd carried a backpack full of wet sand for years and finally set it down for an hour. I walked home instead of taking the bus, stopping at the corner bodega for a bottle of water and a chocolate bar I ate in slow bites, letting the sugar dissolve on my tongue while I replayed snippets of what I'd said aloud for the first time to someone who wasn't family. That evening, Mom was in the kitchen making soup, chicken noodle from a recipe she'd printed years ago and never deviated from, while Dad sat at the island sorting through a stack of old bills, his reading glasses perched low on his nose. I didn't announce that I'd gone to therapy. I just pulled out a stool and started chopping carrots beside her, the rhythmic thunk of the knife steadying my hands. After a while, I said, casually as I could manage, I started seeing someone, a therapist. First session today. Mom paused mid-stir, then resumed, slower. How was it? Hard. Good, though. I cried a lot. Dad looked up then, eyes careful behind the lenses. That's brave, he said, the word sounding foreign in his mouth, like he'd rehearsed it. I shrugged, not ready to accept the compliment yet. It's just talking, but it helps to say things out loud. He nodded, returned to the papers, but I noticed his hands weren't quite steady. Later, after the soup and a quiet dinner where we talked about nothing important, Mom's coworker's new puppy, the forecast calling for snow flurries, I did something small but deliberate. I left my bedroom door open when I went to sketch, the hallway light spilling in, a quiet signal that I wasn't shutting them out completely. Around 9, I heard footsteps, soft, hesitant. Dad appeared in the doorway, holding 2 mugs of chamomile. Thought you might want one, he said, voice low. I took it, set it on my desk beside the half-finished drawing of a cracked sidewalk leading to an open gate. He didn't come in fully, just leaned against the jamb. I went today too, he said, after a moment. My first one. Guy named Dr. Patel. Nice office, bad coffee. A small laugh escaped me, surprised. Yeah, mine had okay tea. He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture I recognized from childhood when he was nervous. Didn't talk much, mostly listened to myself think. Felt weird. It does, at first. We stood there, separated by the threshold, but not by silence, the steam from our mugs rising in lazy curls. Then he said, almost too quiet to hear, I told him about the house, about why I said no to you. He asked if I was punishing you for not being like Alex, and I couldn't answer right away. The admission hung there, raw, and I felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but recognition that he was trying to name the thing I'd been carrying alone. I don't want to punish you anymore, he added. I don't even know if that's what it was, but I'm starting to see how it looked from where you stood. I swallowed, throat tight. It looked like I wasn't worth the risk. He winced, nodded once. I'm sorry, Em. I mean it this time. I didn't say I forgave him. The words weren't ready yet. Instead, I gestured to the second chair by my desk. You can sit if you want, just for a minute. He did, carefully, like he was afraid the seat might collapse under the weight of everything unsaid. We didn't talk much more, just sipped tea, watched the pencil lines on my page take shape into something that almost resembled a bridge. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. Thanks for the open door. Means more than you know. After he left, I sat there a long time, mug cooling in my hands, feeling the first tentative thread of vulnerability weave between us. Not strong yet, not unbreakable, but there. The next few days blurred into small acts that accumulated like snow drifting against a fence. I texted him a photo of the new sketch supplies I bought with the $5,000 he'd transferred. No thank you, Gush, just got these today. And he replied with a single thumbs up emoji. Simple, but present. Mom started leaving notes on the fridge. Therapy going okay today? And I'd scribble back, yeah, still weird, but helpful. One evening, I found Dad in the living room watching an old documentary about urban architecture, the kind of thing I used to watch alone in high school. He didn't change the channel when I sat on the other end of the couch, just muted it during commercials and asked quietly, You still thinking about graphic design? I nodded. Yeah, maybe night classes next semester? Good, he said. Let me know if you need help looking at schedules. It wasn't a grand gesture, no promises of funding everything, but the offer felt different, open-ended, waiting for my lead instead of dictating terms. I went to my second therapy session feeling less like I was walking into battle and more like I was walking towards something, even if I couldn't see the shape of it yet. Dr. Nguyen asked about the week, and when I mentioned the open door, the tea, the brief conversation, she smiled. Not big, just a small curve of acknowledgement. Those are vulnerability acts, she said. Small ones, but they count. They build trust the way big declarations never can. I left that session with homework. One small vulnerability act per day, something honest but low stakes, like sharing a thought without bracing for rejection. That night, I texted Dad a link to a free online portfolio workshop I'd found, thought this might be useful, and he replied within minutes, "Thanks, signing up now." Mom saw the exchange over my shoulder while we washed dishes and squeezed my arm gently. "Look at us," she murmured, "actually communicating." It wasn't perfect. Anger still flared when I thought too long about the house. Grief still ambushed me in quiet moments, but the small steps were stacking, creating a fragile scaffolding around the wreckage. I started sleeping better, not great, but enough that the shadows under my eyes faded. The house felt less like a pressure cooker and more like a place where 3 people were learning, haltingly, to lower their guards one notch at a time. And in those quiet evenings, when the dishwasher hummed and the streetlights came on outside, I began to glimpse the possibility that closeness didn't mean erasing the hurt, it could mean carrying it together, lighter because it was shared. The first joint session happened on a Thursday in early December, snow flurries dusting the windshield of Mom's SUV as we drove the 20 minutes to the family therapist's office in the next town over, a low-slung building with frosted glass doors and a parking lot half full of minivans and sedans that looked as tired as their owners probably felt. We'd agreed on Dr. Elena Marquez after Dad's individual therapist recommended her for cases involving long-buried financial secrets and uneven parental investment. She specialized in adult children and aging parents, which felt clinical and accurate in a way that made me both uncomfortable and relieved. Mom drove, hands tight on the wheel, Dad in the passenger seat staring out at the passing strip malls blurred by the weather, me in the back like a teenager being chauffeured to an appointment I hadn't asked for but knew I needed. No one spoke much during the ride. The radio played soft holiday jazz, nobody turned up or down, just let it fill the space between us. Inside, the waiting area had low couches and current magazines fanned out on a coffee table. Parenting, Psychology Today, a dog-eared copy of Real Simple, and we sat in a row without touching, coats still on, until the receptionist called our last name. Dr. Marquez's office was larger than my individual therapist's, with a round table instead of armchairs, 4 upholstered chairs arranged in a loose square, a small side table holding water bottles, and a tissue box the size of a shoebox. She greeted us calmly, mid-50s, silver streaks in her dark hair, wearing navy slacks and a cream sweater that looked expensive but not showy. Her handshake was firm, her smile measured, the kind that said she'd seen worse and still believed in repair. "We'll start wherever feels safest," she said after we settled. No notepad yet, just open hands on the table. No agenda today, except hearing each other. Silence stretched for a long beat, the kind where you can hear your own pulse. Mom spoke first, voice small but clear. "I think we should start with why we're here, so no one has to guess." She looked at Dad, then at me. "Michael made financial choices over many years that favored his nephew over our daughter. Emily found out by accident. It's broken trust in ways I'm only now understanding fully." Dad exhaled through his nose, shoulders dropping. "That's accurate," he said. "I kept it hidden because I was ashamed and because I told myself it wasn't hurting anyone directly. But it was. It hurt Emily most, and I pretended it didn't because facing that meant facing how much I'd failed as a father." The word failed landed heavy. I felt my throat close, eyes stinging already. Dr. Marquez nodded slowly. "Thank you both for naming it plainly. Emily, what's the deepest piece of that hurt for you right now?" I stared at my hands folded in my lap, nails bitten short from weeks of anxiety. That I was never the priority. Not even close. He could find hundreds of thousands for Alex's dream, but when I asked for a few thousand to finish my associate's degree without drowning in loans, it was no money, figure it out. I spent years believing I just wasn't good enough to invest in. My voice cracked on the last sentence. I hated how vulnerable it sounded, but the room didn't collapse, so I kept going. And now I'm angry at myself for still wanting his approval, for still hoping he'll see me. Dad made a small, choked sound, like something caught in his chest. Dr. Marquez turned to him gently. "Michael, what comes up when you hear that?" He rubbed his face with both hands, then dropped them to the table. "Guilt. So much guilt I can't breathe sometimes. I told myself Alex needed the help more. He was starting a business, had a kid on the way, looked like he was going places. Emily was quieter, artistic. I didn't understand that world, so I didn't value it the way I should have. I thought tough love would make her tough. Instead, it made her feel invisible." He looked at me then, eyes wet. "I see you now, Em. Too late, maybe, but I see you." The words cracked something open in me, not wide, not all the way, but enough that tears slipped free without warning. Mom reached over, rested her hand on my forearm, light but steady. We talked for the full 50 minutes after that, circling the same wounds from different angles: Dad's childhood scarcity mindset that made him hoard affection like money, Mom's habit of deferring to him to keep peace that ended up costing her daughter's trust too, my fear that forgiving him would mean excusing the damage. Dr. Marquez guided without leading, asking questions that forced us to name the unspoken. What did you need from your father at 18 that you didn't get? What would safety look like in this relationship now? And by the end, my head ached, but the ache felt productive, like stretching a muscle that had been clenched for years. As we stood to leave, she gave us one small assignment. In the next 2 weeks, each of us would initiate one moment of physical closeness. Not forced, not performative, just a deliberate act of nearness. A hand on a shoulder during coffee, sitting side by side on the couch instead of opposite ends, something to remind our bodies that we were still in the same space. We drove home in near silence again, but it was different this time. Less brittle, more thoughtful. Snow had started sticking to the grass, turning the neighborhood into something softer, quieter. At home, Mom turned on the kettle while Dad hung up coats. I lingered in the hallway, watching them move around each other with the careful choreography of people relearning proximity. After tea, Dad hesitated by the living room doorway. "Want to watch something?" he asked, voice tentative. I nodded, followed him in, and we sat on the couch, not touching, but closer than we'd been in months, maybe ever. He put on a nature documentary about Arctic wildlife, the kind with slow pans over ice fields and gentle narration. Halfway through, during a segment on polar bear mothers and cubs, he shifted slightly, his shoulder brushing mine. I didn't pull away, neither did he. The contact was small, barely there, but it registered like a current, warm, startling, real. Mom joined us later, settling on my other side with a throw blanket she draped over all three of us without comment. We watched until the credits rolled, the room lit only by the television glow and the string lights Mom had put up early for the holidays, tiny white stars blinking against the dark windows. When the screen went black, Dad spoke first. Quiet enough I almost missed it. "Thank you for coming today, both of you." Mom squeezed my hand under the blanket, I squeezed back. I didn't say, "You're welcome," didn't say, "I forgive you." Those words still felt too big, too final. Instead I said, "Next week?" He echoed, "Next week," and for the first time, the agreement didn't feel like obligation. Later, in my room, I texted Mara a quick update. First family therapy. Cried, talked, sat on the same couch afterward without wanting to bolt. Small win. Her reply came fast. Huge win. Keep stacking them. I fell asleep with the throw blanket still around my shoulders, the faint scent of Dad's aftershave lingering on the fabric from where our arms had brushed, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it was holding secrets in the walls. It felt like it was holding us. 3 people learning, inch by careful inch, how to reach across the distance without flinching when fingers finally met. The steps were tentative, the trust paper-thin, but it was there, fragile and growing, in the shared silence of a documentary neither of us had really watched, in the deliberate choice to stay in the same room until the credits rolled and the lights came up soft. The family weekend away landed on the calendar like a dare we'd all quietly accepted, but still weren't entirely sure we could survive. A rented cabin in the Pocono Mountains, 2 hours north of our suburb, booked months earlier by Mom in a burst of pre-therapy optimism she later confessed she almost canceled after the discovery. By mid-January, the snow had piled high enough to make the drive feel purposeful rather than punitive, tires crunching over Sultan roads while the heater blasted warm air scented faintly with the pine air freshener Dad kept in the glove compartment. We took Dad's SUV instead of Mom's smaller car because it had all-wheel drive and room for the extra groceries we'd stocked. Canned soup, bread, coffee grounds, the makings of simple meals so we wouldn't have to venture out and pretend normalcy in a ski lodge restaurant full of strangers. I sat in the back with my sketchbook open on my lap, pencil hovering but not moving much, watching the landscape shift from strip malls to bare trees to rolling white hills that looked soft enough to disappear into. No one forced conversation. The radio played a classic rock station low enough that we could ignore it or hum along if the mood struck, and for once, nobody changed the dial when a song Dad liked came on. The cabin was small but sturdy. Dark wood siding, stone fireplace, 3 bedrooms branching off a central living area with a plaid sofa that sagged in the middle, and windows overlooking a frozen lake dotted with ice fishing huts. We unloaded in the cold, breath clouding, carrying bags inside while snowflakes caught in our hair and melted on the threshold. Mom claimed the smallest bedroom with the twin bed, saying she liked the quiet. Dad took the one with the bunk beds left over from someone else's family vacations. I got the loft upstairs, reached by a narrow staircase with a slanted ceiling and a view of treetops heavy with snow. The first evening, we kept it simple. Mom made chili from a packet mix she'd brought, adding ground beef and kidney beans she browned in the tiny kitchen, while Dad built a fire with logs stacked beside the hearth, the kindling crackling as it caught. I set the table with mismatched plates from the rental cupboard, lit the single candle we'd packed, and for a while, the ordinary motions, spooning chili into bowls, passing the cornbread Mom had baked in the oven, felt almost restorative, like muscle memory overriding the tension. We ate at the small pine table, forks scraping ceramic, the fire popping in the background. Halfway through the meal, Dad cleared his throat. "I brought something," he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out a slim envelope. He slid it across to me without flourish. Inside was a printout of a community college course catalog for the spring semester, graphic design fundamentals circled in red pen, tuition costs highlighted, and beside it, a cashier's check made out to the school for the exact amount of the first 2 classes plus books. "I called them last week," he said quietly. "Asked what you'd need to register without loans this time. If you want to take them, it's covered. If not, no pressure." My fingers trembled around the paper. I stared at the numbers, the official seal, the small act that couldn't undo years, but could start rewriting the next chapter. "Thank you," I whispered, throat tight. Mom reached over and touched his wrist briefly, a gesture so small it might have gone unnoticed if I hadn't been looking. After dinner, we moved to the living room, mugs of decaf in hand, the fire throwing long shadows across the walls. Mom suggested cards, something mindless, so we played gin rummy on the coffee table, keeping score on the back of an old receipt, laughing once when Dad misremembered the rules and tried to lay down a meld that didn't exist. The laughter felt startling, foreign after so many months of careful quiet, but no one rushed to fill the silence afterward. Later, when the fire had burned low and the wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, we talked, really talked, for the first time without a therapist mediating. Dad started, voice rough from the smoke and the emotion. "I keep thinking about the day you were born, Em. You were so small, and I held you in the hospital room and promised myself I'd give you everything I never had. Then life got complicated. Bills, Linda's divorce, Alex coming along like the son I thought I'd missed out on having, and I started measuring love in dollars because it was easier than measuring it in time, in attention." He paused, stared into the embers. "I was wrong. I robbed you of believing you were worth investing in, and I robbed myself of knowing who you really are." Tears tracked down his face then, silent, unashamed. I'd never seen him cry openly before, not even at Grandma's funeral. Mom wiped her own eyes with the sleeve of her sweater. "I let it happen," she said. "I told myself it was his area, money, decisions. I didn't push back because I was afraid of rocking the boat, and the boat sank anyway." I listened, chest aching, then spoke the words I'd rehearsed in therapy but never quite believed I'd say aloud. "I spent so long being angry at you both that I forgot how much I still love you, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt." The admission unlocked something. We sat there crying together, not dramatically, just steadily, the kind of tears that wash away layers of defense. When the fire dwindled to coals, Dad stood, stiff from sitting, and offered his hand to help me up. I took it, his palm calloused, warm, and he pulled me into a hug, awkward at first, then tighter, his chin resting on my head the way he used to when I was little. Mom joined, her arms around both of us, and we stood like that in the middle of the cabin, snow tapping the windows, the 3 of us breathing in the same smoky air, hearts thudding against each other in uneven rhythm. It wasn't magic. The hurt didn't vanish, but the embrace felt earned, heavy with everything we'd carried to get there. The rest of the weekend unfolded in small, deliberate ways that stitched us closer. Morning walks along the plowed path around the lake, breath fogging as we pointed out animal tracks in the snow. Afternoons reading by the fire, me sketching while Dad dozed in the armchair and Mom worked a crossword. Evenings cooking together, pancakes one night, pasta the next, the kitchen filling with ordinary smells that reminded us life could still taste good. On the last morning before we packed up, we sat on the porch steps wrapped in blankets, watching the sun rise pink over the frozen water. Dad's arm rested lightly around my shoulders. I leaned into it without thinking. "I'm proud of you," he said, voice low. "Not just for surviving this, for still letting us try." I nodded, tears freezing on my lashes. "I'm proud of you too, for showing up." Mom squeezed my hand on my other side. "All of us," she murmured. The drive home was quieter than the drive up, but the silence felt companionable now, threaded with the memory of shared tears and shared warmth. When we pulled into our driveway, the snow had stopped, the neighborhood glittering under streetlights just coming on. We carried bags inside, hung wet coats to dry, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel like it was waiting for the next shoe to drop. It felt like it was waiting for us to keep coming back to it together. That night, I fell asleep in my own bed, listening to the faint sounds of Mom and Dad talking in the kitchen below, voices low and unhurried, and beneath the familiar ache of old wounds, I felt something new stirring. Not perfection, not even full forgiveness yet, but the hard-earned beginning of reconnection, physical and emotional, built on a weekend where we'd finally chosen closeness over distance, one tentative touch at a time. 1 year to the day after I opened that email in the dim glow of the living room laptop, the house looked almost the same on the surface. The same sagging couch with its optimistic throw pillows, the same bay window streaked with February rain, the same faint coffee scent lingering from the morning pot. But the air inside felt different, lighter somehow, as though the walls had exhaled months of held tension and learned to breathe again. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the final portfolio project for my graphic design certificate program, the one I'd started last spring with the tuition Dad paid without hesitation or strings, the screen displaying a clean layout of mock book covers I designed for an indie publisher's young adult series, colors vivid against the white background. The certificate itself hung framed on the wall above the fridge now, a small square of cream cardstock beside the older photos of me in high school graduation cap and gown, the one where Dad's arm is around my shoulders but his smile looks distracted, like he was already thinking about something else. Today, his smile in the newer snapshots, taken at my cap and gown redo last December, was different, unguarded, proud in a way that reached his eyes without apology. Mom was at the stove, stirring risotto, the kind with mushrooms and parmesan she'd learned from a cooking app during one of her quieter months, while Dad stood at the island, chopping onions for the side salad, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the knife moving in steady, practiced rhythm. We'd fallen into this routine over the months. Sunday dinners cooked together, no television unless someone specifically asked for it, conversation that meandered without landmines because we'd spent so many sessions naming the old ones. Therapy had tapered off, individual every 6 weeks now, joint once a month, but the habits stuck. Checking in before big decisions, saying the hard thing even when it felt easier to swallow it, leaving doors open literally and figuratively. I closed the laptop when the rice was ready, helped set the table with the good plates we rarely used, lit the taper candles Mom kept in a drawer for special occasions that had become just another Sunday. We sat down, past the bowl of risotto, the salad, a basket of garlic bread still warm from the oven. No one rushed to fill the silence. It felt comfortable now, the kind that holds space rather than pressure. Halfway through the meal, Dad set his fork down, looked at me across the table. 1 year, he said quietly, not as a question, but as a marker. I nodded, throat suddenly tight. Feels longer and shorter at the same time. Mom reached for the wine bottle, red, inexpensive, the kind we'd started buying because it tasted better than the boxed stuff we used to default to, and poured a small glass for each of us, even though I rarely drank more than half. To the year we didn't think we'd get through, she said, raising her glass. We clinked, the sound soft and clear in the warm kitchen. And to the one we're building instead, I added, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. Dad's eyes glistened, but he didn't look away. I still wake up some nights thinking about that house in Portland, he admitted, voice low. Not the money, exactly. The choice. How I justified it to myself every single time I signed a transfer. I'll carry that regret forever, Em. But carrying it means I don't get to pretend it didn't happen, and that's the least I owe you. I swallowed, set my glass down. I still get angry sometimes. Not the screaming kind anymore. Just this quiet burn when I see Alex post about his new deck or whatever. But it doesn't stay as long, and when it comes, I don't hide it from you guys. That helps. Mom nodded, her hand finding mine under the table for a brief squeeze. We've all learned to name the burn before it spreads. That's something. After dinner, we cleared the table together, no one claiming kitchen duty as punishment or penance anymore. It was just what we did. Dad loaded the dishwasher while Mom wiped counters, and I dried the wine glasses by hand because they felt too nice for the machine. When the kitchen was tidy, we moved to the living room, the string lights Mom kept up year-round casting a soft glow over the mantel where new photos had joined the old ones, me at my first gallery showing last fall, a tiny local cafe display of my illustrations, the three of us at the cabin last winter, bundled in coats on the porch steps, snow in our hair, Dad and me at the community college commencement, his arm around me again, this time without distraction. We settled on the couch, me in the middle this time, not by accident, Mom on one side, Dad on the other, a throw blanket draped across our laps. Dad picked up the remote but didn't turn on the television right away. I've been thinking, he said, about the equity line. It's paid down now, almost cleared. When it's gone, we're opening a new savings account. For you, for whatever comes next. Grad school if you want it, a down payment someday, travel, anything. No secrets, no side transfers. Mom and I will match whatever you put in, dollar for dollar, until you're on your feet. The offer landed gentle, not like a grand gesture, but like a promise kept over time. I felt tears prick. Not the sharp kind from a year ago, but something warmer, quieter. I'd like that, I said. And maybe we add a line item for Alex and Aunt Linda, too, if they really need help, not wants disguised as needs. But we decide together. Dad exhaled, a sound almost like relief. Together, he echoed. Mom leaned her head against my shoulder. I rested mine against Dad's. We sat like that for a long time, the rain tapping the windows in steady rhythm, the house creaking softly around us as old houses do. Eventually, Dad turned on the television, found a documentary about national parks we'd all seen before, and we watched without really watching, content in the nearness. Later, when the credits rolled and the room had grown dim, I stood to head upstairs but paused at the foot of the stairs. I love you both, I said, the words simple, unadorned, but they carried the weight of everything we'd walked through to reach them. Love you too, kiddo, Dad replied, voice thick. More than you know. Mom smiled, eyes shining. Always have, always will. I climbed the stairs slowly, listening to them murmur downstairs as they turned off lights, locked the back door. The small domestic sounds that once felt routine now felt precious. In my room, I opened the window a crack, letting the cool, wet air drift in, carrying the scent of rain-soaked earth and distant traffic. The scar was still there, the memory of being unseen, undervalued, but it had healed over, raised but no longer raw, a reminder rather than an open wound. The bond we'd rebuilt wasn't seamless. It carried the marks of fracture, the places where trust had been tested and mended with deliberate care. But it was stronger for the mending, flexible in ways the old version never was, able to bend without breaking because we'd learned how to hold each other accountable and still hold each other close. As I lay in bed listening to the house settle, the furnace clicking on, the rain softening to a drizzle, I felt something settle in me too. Not fairy tale closure, not perfect harmony, but a quiet, realistic hope. We were a family scarred but standing, three people who chose, day after day, to show up, to speak truth, to reach across the distance until fingers met and stayed. And in that scarred strength, in the everyday miracle of shared meals and open doors and honest apologies, I finally understood that being someone's priority wasn't about money or grand gestures. It was about presence, persistence, the slow accumulation of moments where love showed up even when it was hard. Down the hall, I heard their bedroom door close softly, the house falling into its familiar nighttime hush, and for the first time in years, I fell asleep without the weight of old hurt pressing on my chest, only the gentle pressure of gratitude for the flawed, hard-won closeness we'd built. 1 year, one conversation, one small act of courage at a time.